Hello everyone. How are you all and are you having fun? So right now we have to look at some more definitions in GST. Students, in fact, we are doing the third class on definitions. And in today's class, now we will begin with the definition of ECO. Electronic Commerce Operator. What is an ECO? Electronic Commerce Operator means that the operator is the one who has created a platform. A platform created by an operator, this platform could be a website or it could be a mobile app, on which the buyer and seller both will be there and they will be transacting with each other. So suppose that if there is someone who has created a platform, okay, and on that platform the buyer and the seller make transaction with each other, so it's called an e-commerce operator. There is another definition, aggregator, and there's a thin line of difference between aggregator and e-commerce operator. However, in GST, e-commerce operator includes aggregator. Why did I say this before I started to explain that? E-commerce operator includes aggregator for the purpose of GST. You should not really care about the thin line difference. You can skip it or even ignore this thing, because both of them will be called e-commerce operators in GST. Clear? Okay. What is the difference between e-commerce and aggregator? I'm just talking to you in general, not for the purpose of GST, because in GST e-commerce operator includes aggregator. If an e-commerce operator is one who facilitates the entire transaction between the buyer and the seller, means taking goods from the seller and delivering them to buyer, facilitating the entire transaction, taking the payment and making the payment, means everything will revolve through ECO only. That's called ECO. An aggregator is someone who connects a seller with buyer. He participates in transaction a little bit or maybe not at all, meaning they do not have a complete system in place to facilitate the entire transaction. They partially facilitate the transaction or maybe they don't facilitate it at all. Like OLX is a website. Right. In that, what is OLX? It's a website, okay. And what kind of website is it? Where both the buyer and the seller come, but they carry out the transaction between the buyer and seller themselves. In between, it doesn't matter to OLX. You put your belongings on and the customer will directly contact you, and you yourself can do the bargainings and sell it at whatever rate. Here, the platform that is in between who is facilitating it is not concerned with that. So this is a kind of aggregator. What does Flipkart do? Flipkart does the entire transaction. It will take goods from you and deliver them to customer. It will collect the payment from customer and give you the payment. So what is Flipkart? It is an ECO. Right, but you don't need to know that. That's a very good point. Come on. Electronic Commerce Operator. So who is Electronic Commerce Operator or ECO for you? Anyone who created a platform and connects buyers with sellers. Electronic Commerce Operator means any person who owns, operates or manages digital or electronic facility or platform for electronic commerce. The person who owns, operates and manages this. A platform, a facility from which electronic online commerce can happen. Right. It includes every person who directly or indirectly owns, operates or manages a digital or electronic facility or platform for supply of goods or services or both. Okay, tell me one thing. I too am selling online courses on my website, so am I also an ECO? Answer is no. I would have been called an ECO when I brought buyer and the seller on my platform and they were doing the transaction with each other. No. I created a website with whose products? With my products. I am not an ECO. I'm not the ECO, then I'm the supplier. Pay attention. Supplier, recipient, and in between is the ECO. ECO brings these two together. Okay. A person who creates a platform that connects buyers and sellers is called an ECO. I also created my own online website. I sell goods on it. I'm not an ECO. I'm not an ECO. Why? Because I'm the supplier myself. I am the supplier. I'm not connecting a supplier and a buyer. I'm the supplier myself. Right. Okay. There are many websites in the education also that you'll see connects the buyers and sellers together. They connect buyers and sellers who are not suppliers themselves. They connect the teachers and students. Okay? Right, so what is it? It's ECO. But the key point to understand is that in this transaction, an ECO is there when supplier invoices to the recipient. Okay, so when the supplier invoices to the recipient, then this platform in the middle is called the ECO. Let's say someone created a platform. Okay, now we're talking about second thing. Here is the supplier and here is the recipient. Meaning just bringing buyer seller together won't create ECO. Okay, this platform is the ECO because here supplier invoice the recipient. This platform connects the supplier and recipient. But the supplier sends bill to this one and this sends bill to this one. So here it's called that here there are two transactions happening. It's not single transaction. Okay, so here we have two transactions. In this transaction, this is the supplier and this is the recipient. And the second transaction is this one, where this is the supplier and this is the recipient. There is no ECO here. There's no ECO. So ECO is not created just by getting the buyer and seller together. Get the buyer and seller together. And the seller bills the buyer, then it will be ECO. Did you have fun? Right? Whether it's facilitating the entire transaction or not is not the point. Because whether they facilitate the entire transaction or not, it's the ECO. One who facilitates the transaction is generally called an ECO, and the one who does not facilitate the transaction is called an aggregator. Transaction facilitating means taking responsibility for delivering the goods, taking responsibility for collecting and delivering payment. This is all called facilitating the transaction. If they facilitate the transaction, or if they don't, it will be called ECO for the purpose of GST. In simple words, one who facilitates the transaction is called ECO, and one who doesn't facilitate the transaction is called an aggregator. Okay, so we can set these things aside because they are not relevant to us. What matters to us in terms of the definition of ECO is this: ECO is a platform. It brings the buyer and seller together, and the seller bills the buyer. Okay? Okay, the story here can be much more than this. Who is being paid? This recipient is paying the ECO or is giving it to the supplier. All these things doesn't matter. Whether the goods reach the ECO through the supplier then to the recipient, or is reaching the recipient directly from the supplier, doesn't matter. Forget about how the goods are going and how the money is coming. Just remember whatever I'm saying. If you do that, then you will be able to identify ECO. Otherwise, in the exam, mistakes will happen. Here also it seemed like that it's a platform, that this is also an ECO, that it is connecting the buyer and seller, but no. Right, well, you know, in education, all the websites that you might know, right? From where you basically buy these, if you are buying all these CS, CMA classes. So all of these websites are not at all ECO, because the teacher bills them and that website bills you. That's not an ECO at all. See what a wonderful thing I have explained. It is not an ECO. It must have felt good to know this. Flipkart is an ECO. Because the invoice you receive is not from Flipkart, it is from the supplier. Have you ever seen it? If you take out any bill from Flipkart and look, just the Flipkart's logo is at the top. And there you will see the name of the supplier. Something private limited. Something private limited, you're buying every product from different suppliers. The seller is someone else. It's not Flipkart. You don't get bill from Flipkart. That's why it's an ECO. If Flipkart were to give bill, then Flipkart won't be an ECO. Flipkart will not be called an ECO. Right. Okay, you might say that Flipkart itself sells a lot of goods. I know, and I read somewhere that Flipkart also sells goods. It's a supplier? No. Okay, Flipkart has created a company with the name Flipkart, right? So what does it do? It only works like an ECO. Flipkart has created many other companies. Right. That company is registered as a seller here. It's registered as a seller on this platform in ECO, meaning Flipkart directly from that company. Named Flipkart, it doesn't sell goods directly from that company. Flipkart has created other companies, which are the sellers. Okay, so don't get confused because Flipkart nowadays sells goods from its own brand. The product's name has been kept as Flipkart. Okay, so you'll see that the seller's name there is not Flipkart. The seller's name is different. It's Flipkart's company, but it's a separate company. Right, so Flipkart company, the main Flipkart company, what has it done? It has just created a platform to bring buyers and sellers together. And it asks the seller to make the bill. That's why Flipkart is an ECO. Amazon is ECO. Okay? So all of these, what is their name? Names like Swiggy and Zomato. What are all these? These will come under the definition of ECO. Right? Because these people are connecting buyer with seller and they are not selling the goods themselves. Or they are not doing the billing themselves. While an aggregator Ola or Swiggy, all these aggregators only connect the customer with the supplier or service provider. An e-commerce operator like Flipkart facilitates. Now don't think that if he's facilitating it or not, if he is facilitating the transaction or not, it's still an ECO, right? Okay. Nowadays business, the line of business is also changing slowly, right? Okay. Meaning many people who were facilitating transactions have now stopped doing so. Like India Mart is a website, I'll tell you. Okay, that is a pure aggregator in a way. Because the buyer and seller meet there and do the transaction among themselves. The entire process of the supply of goods and provision of services under the GST law, even the aggregator would be covered under the definition of ECO, so the matter is settled. So who is the ECO? Two things. Number one, it will create platform. Platform 2, match buyer seller to connect the buyer and seller. Second, seller gives invoice to buyer. That's all. Just remember this much. And you are safe. There will never be any mistakes. The following aspects need to be noted. Is required to deduct an amount of tax. He is required to deduct an amount as tax out of the consideration paid or payable by him to the actual supplier of goods or services or both made through such operators. He is required to deduct an amount as tax. Okay? He has to deduct TCS. Okay, he has to deduct TCS when the e-commerce operator makes the payment. Like I had explained you one thing. For example, he has to make payment of 100 rupees. From 100 rupees, he will first deduct his commission. And he will also deduct a tax TCS. Due to which what will happen? When the e-commerce operator deduct TCS, then he will file the TCS return. Okay, this TCS is not the income tax one. This is the GST one. Okay, he will deduct TCS and deposit this TCS. When he deposits this TCS, so the transaction record will appear and it will be clear that this particular seller has sold this much goods through Flipkart on which this much TCS has been deducted. Many people were selling countless nonsense goods through Amazon and Flipkart and they didn't properly record their sales. So the government introduced this TCS provision. So what will we do? We will only get a small percentage of tax deducted by e-commerce operators. Then what will we do? We will make them submit and file a return that tell me how many sellers are there who sell goods, what's the value of goods they sell, and how much TCS did you deduct from them. So on the GST portal, the one in front, that the seller who's there, record will be visible there also that Flipkart claims you have sold goods worth 5 crore rupees. Okay, so now he won't be able to file less sales return because everything is visible and clear. The law requires the operator to collect tax at source in respect of. Okay, you might be thinking that I'm not mentioning how much the rate is. The rate for this. All of this will be covered when we get to the TCS chapter. I don't need to explain it now. Okay, currently it's running at 1%. In the coming time, it will also become 0.1% and what will be applicable for which exam I will tell you when we come to the TCS chapter. That's why we weren't putting much thought into the rate. There's 1% and 0.1% as well. The law requires the operator to collect tax at source in respect of supplies, where the consideration is collected by the electronic commerce operator. For TCS, it is saying that it's their responsibility. However, this provision would not apply to a transaction where monies are received by the supplier on delivery. COD basis and the delivery is made directly by the supplier. Understand this. Like for example, wherever the ECO is taking the money himself and he can deduct the money and give, he will deduct his commission and TCS and then give it. But sometimes it happens that the ECO is not facilitating the transaction because I explained that the ECO can facilitate the transaction or may not facilitate it. So if he is not facilitating the transaction, in this case, it's possible that the supplier is giving the product to whom? To the buyer, and the buyer is making payment to whom? Directly to supplier. In this case, since the ECO did not receive the payment, so where will he deduct the TCS from? It's saying that there's no need to deduct it. Okay, when will TCS be deducted? It will be deducted only in one case. This is the ECO. This is the supplier. This is the recipient. If the recipient makes the payment to the ECO, and then ECO will make the payment to the supplier. So from this payment, TCS is deductible. TCS is deductible, it's deducted. But if this is the ECO, this is the supplier. And this is the recipient. And this directly pays him and not give it to the ECO. So TCS is not applicable. In this case, TCS will not be applicable. It won't even be able to, right? How can it be? Where will it deduct? From where will the ECO deduct? It didn't receive the money. So from where will it deduct? Okay. Now coming to the next definition, supplier. Who is supplier? We have been talking about this repeatedly. In ECO, two people were repeatedly mentioned, supplier and recipient. So the next two definitions that you'll see are who is supplier and who is the recipient. Right? Let's see who's supplier. Supplier in relation to any goods or services or both shall mean the person supplying the said goods or services or both, and shall include an agent acting as such on behalf of such supplier in relation to the goods or services or both supplied. Supplier in relation to any goods or services or both shall mean the person supplying the said goods or services. The person who is supplying, will call him supplier. Person supplying the goods and services is supplier. Okay? The person who is supplying, do you remember? When you read the definition, you read person, a registered person. You read two things. Here it's not referring to registered person supplying goods and services as supplier, it's saying any person. Whether they are registered under GST or not, they are supplier. Whoever supplies goods and services, whether they are registered under GST or not, whether they are registered, unregistered, doesn't matter, one who supplies is supplier. That means there's no requirement for supplier to be GST registered. A supplier means one who supplies goods and services. And shall include an agent acting as such on behalf of such supplier. Okay. If we are selling goods on behalf of someone else, then we are also a supplier. Okay? Who is called agent? Someone who sells goods without purchasing them, we call them agent. Like, I had taken an example of an exhibition. What does an exhibition organizer do? He tells the painters to bring and hang their paintings. Customer will come to my exhibition and when he would buy and take it. So I will give you its money. Now what does the person who organizes the exhibition do here? Customer comes and he sells the painting to them. He makes bill and sells it. Tell me one thing, did he himself bought it? He didn't buy it. He sells it without even buying it. So the guy who sells the goods without even buying them is called an agent. Is that agent a supplier? Answer is yes. The reference to whom the meaning of the term supplier is fitted is person. This was a very important point. I even wrote it down so you wouldn't forget. I focused on this here. That here in the definition of supplier, the term person has been used as against taxable person or registered person. Okay? This is because the law does not keep persons who are not liable to tax under GST outside the scope of this term. Even if you are not liable under GST, you are still a supplier. For instance, in case of purchases from unregistered person, who are not liable for registration would also be treated as suppliers, while the recipient of the supply is liable to tax on reverse charge basis. Because in GST, reverse charge also applies. If the supplier is registered, they will collect GST and give it to the government. If the supplier is unregistered and the recipient is registered, supplier is unregistered and recipient is registered. So the government says to the recipient, the one who buys, you give the tax on your purchase to government. Listen, let's understand again. Here's the supplier. And here we put the recipient. Okay, supplier registered and recipient unregistered. Okay, so what will happen in this case? Case number 1 is supplier registered, recipient unregistered. So the supplier will pay tax to the government. Supplier will pay. From where will he collect? He will collect from the buyer itself, right? It's indirect tax, not direct tax, that he will pay from his own pocket. He will collect on his sales. Okay, the supplier is registered. And this is also registered. No problem, the supplier will collect the GST and pay it to government. Supplier will pay tax to government. Now the third point is both is unregistered. Unregistered, then no tax. No tax will be applied on this. Now fourth case. So this is the unregistered one. And this one is registered. Now what will happen? It is saying reverse charge will be applicable. Reverse charge applicable. Tax payable by. Tax payable by recipient. Recipient will pay the tax to government. Did you have fun while studying this? Agents supplying on behalf of the supplier are also included within the meaning of supplier. This is to ensure that invoices raised by the agent on behalf of the supplier for effecting sales on his behalf qualify as valid invoice as if they were issued by the supplier himself. It is saying that we call the agent as supplier because if we exclude the agent from the definition of supply, so the poor guy who's creating invoice will become invalid, right? When someone is buying the painting in the exhibition, he's creating the invoice readily without even purchasing the goods, right? It will be valid only when we call the agent supplier, so the agent is supplier. That is why. Recipient. Who is the recipient? One who receives the goods and services. Recipient of supply of goods and services or both. Means where consideration is payable. If consideration is being given for goods and services, so the recipient is the one who gives consideration or is liable to give it where a consideration is payable for the supply of goods or services or both. The person who is liable to pay that consideration. It's a very simple matter. If I've provided any goods and service, then whoever is liable to pay consideration is recipient. Recipient of my goods and service is the one who is liable to pay consideration. Okay. Second, where no consideration is payable. For the supply of goods, I did the supply of goods. Whether it's goods or services, both were being discussed here. Okay? Both matters are different in no consideration. No consideration for goods. No consideration if a service is provided. I provided goods and services and took something from you. So the one we took from or will take is the recipient of goods and services. Okay? Where no consideration is payable for the goods. If the consideration is not payable, I provided the goods, but consideration is not payable then. The person to whom the goods are delivered or made available, or to whom the possession or use of the goods is given or made available. To whom the goods were given. To whom the goods were handed over to or who has the possession. He's the recipient of goods. Let me explain the examples. Okay, so I go to a shopkeeper. Okay, and then I buy a pair of jeans. I make the payment to him and I said to him, deliver this to my friend. Who is recipient of goods? Me. The one who pays is called the recipient. For that shopkeeper, my friend is not the recipient. Listen again. I went to a jeans shop and I bought a pair of jeans. I paid the money and told him to deliver it to my friend. I told the shopkeeper. Who received the goods? My friend. And who is the recipient of goods? I am. The one who pays the money, that person is the recipient. Is this clear? One who pays the money in respect to both goods and services is the recipient. Right? Let's talk about second thing. I went to a travel agency and then I gave them 2 lakh rupees and I asked them to organize my friend's honeymoon trip. Tell me, who got this travel service? My friend. He will receive it, but who will be called the recipient here? Me. I gave the money. Okay. Now if the money is not paid and the goods are received, then whomsoever receives is the recipient. Okay, the person who received it is the recipient. Now, for example, in this case, let's say I went to a jeans store. I said deliver it to my friend, but the shopkeeper didn't take the money. Now pay attention, the fact that he didn't take money doesn't mean that I did something for him. This doesn't mean anything, because if I had done something then. The act done is the consideration. Okay, that's not the case. He didn't take the money and he gave the jeans to my friend, so you know. So my friend is the recipient. If the money for the goods was not given, so then whoever received the goods is the recipient. In case of service also, where no consideration is payable for supply of service, the person to whom the service is rendered the one who received the service. Okay, so it's a very simple matter if money is paid for goods and services. Whoever pays the money is the recipient, and if money is not paid, then the person who received the goods, the person who has the goods, or those who were provided the service is called the recipient. It's simple. And any reference to a person to whom a supply is made shall be construed as reference to the recipient of supply, and shall include an agent acting as such on behalf of the recipient in relation to goods or services or both supplied. What's it saying? Sometimes just as the supplier can be my agent, sometimes the recipient can also be my agent. This happens in many places. I will tell you how it happens. Like I am Maggi Ketchup. I'm Maggi Ketchup, meaning I'm the company that manufactures Maggi Ketchup. Okay. Or you'll say that sir is ketchup. So, I purchase lot of tomatoes. So, how do I buy tomatoes? I have many agents in the market. And each agent buys all the tomatoes from one village each. Maggi Ketchup, you understand how much ketchup is made, right? And how many tomatoes are required for that. I have agents and each one has 5 to 10 villages under their control. One agent goes and he buys and brings all the tomatoes from 10 villages. Okay. So in this way, sometimes the agent takes it, receives it. So that agent is also the recipient. Okay, he's receiving it on my behalf. It's true, but he's recipient. Understood? So like the agent who was selling on my behalf was the supplier. Similarly, if someone's receiving it on my behalf, then they are the recipient. Understood? This was the definition of the supplier, of the recipient, and the ECO, which you did in today's class. And with this, we have completed the first chapter. Only MCQs remain, which we will look together in next class. We'll stop here.